The Amazon rainforest is struggling.
The destruction
of the Amazon rainforest.
Deforestation, climate change, and human activity threaten its survival. Yet beneath the canopy, tiny engineers called leafcutter ants have long shaped the forest. Their tunnels aerate soil, redistribute nutrients, and help new plants grow. At the same time, their appetite can stunt young trees and alter ecosystems. Now, Brazilian scientists are experimenting with super ants, enhanced allies in the fight to restore the jungle. Blending nature's power with human ingenuity, Brazil is now going all out to execute a plan that was once mocked by scientists, and the jungle has started changing. Brazil, losing its green heart. The Amazon has always been more than just a forest. It's a living system the size of a continent, breathing in carbon, exhaling oxygen, and keeping the planet's climate in rhythm. Spanning 9 countries, most of it in Brazil, the Amazon is home to nearly 390 billion trees representing 16,000 different species. It harbors around 10% of Earth's total biodiversity and shelters more than 400 indigenous tribes, some of whom have never had contact with the outside world. If the Earth had lungs, this would be one of them. But lately, the Amazon's breathing has become shallow. The Amazon doesn't just regulate global temperatures, it also powers economies and cultures. Its rivers generate rain clouds that water crops across South America, while its soil and wood have long supported livelihoods and industries. Yet this very productivity has become a double-edged sword. For decades, the same land that stores the planet's carbon has been stripped to feed cattle, grow soybeans, and mine minerals for global markets. The result? Brazil is losing its green heart, 1 hectare at a time. Massive deforestation began back in the 1960s, spurred by ambitious development projects and the belief that the jungle was an obstacle to progress. Bulldozers carved highways through the forest. Ranchers followed, bringing cattle and chainsaws. By the 1980s, entire stretches of wilderness were gone. According to research, 11% of the Amazon has already disappeared, roughly 640,000 square kilometers, an area the size of France. Almost all of it has been converted into farmland, primarily cattle pasture. The Map Biomas network, which tracks changes in land use, paints an even bleaker picture. Between 1985 and 2018, Brazil lost 89 million hectares of natural vegetation, with 47 million hectares vanishing from the Amazon alone. In simple terms, that's like erasing half of the United Kingdom from the map, replaced by fields and fences. In 1985, natural forests made up about 77% of Brazil's land area. Today, that number has dropped to 66%. Agriculture now covers nearly a third of the entire country. It's an extraordinary shift in just a few decades, one that has rewritten the map of South America. The problem isn't just the missing trees, it's what follows after. When forests fall, other things start to follow. Land use data shows that about 70% of the planet's surface has already been altered by human activity: roads, cities, agriculture, and mining. In Brazil, the shift has been particularly aggressive. Pasture land expanded by 46%, agricultural land by 172% in just 3 decades. The Amazon and the Atlantic forest together now carry most of Brazil's agricultural load, hosting 81% of all production and 57% of the country's livestock herd. Yet, the cost of this productivity is staggering. Both ecosystems are teetering on the edge. The Atlantic forest, which once stretched across Brazil's southeastern coast, retains only 12% of its original cover. The Amazon, though larger, is showing similar warning signs. Researchers say reversing this trend will require a complete rethink of how land is managed. As Azevedo puts it, we need to reconcile livelihoods, food production, and the conservation of what remains. But it wasn't just trees dying. The very rhythm of life inside the jungle was changing. The jungle starts to struggle. The Amazon was never meant to burn. It was meant to breathe, to pull in carbon, exhale oxygen, and keep the planet's climate in balance. But now, it's coughing. The very heart of Brazil's jungle, once thick, damp, and full of life, is feeling the fever of a warming world. Over the last few decades, average temperatures in parts of the Amazon have climbed by as much as 1.5 degrees Celsius. That might sound small, like the difference between a warm day and a hot one. But in an ecosystem this delicate, even a half-degree shift can turn balance into chaos. Trees that once thrived in the wet, shaded understory now wither faster. Rivers that used to flood predictably have turned moody, overflowing one season, bone dry the next. The rain, too, has become unreliable. It no longer follows the rhythm that plants, animals, and people built their lives around. Scientists have a word for what's happening: dieback. It's the nightmare scenario. when parts of the lush green Amazon start to dry out so much that they begin to resemble savanna, not rainforest. The process feeds on itself. Less rain means fewer trees mean less moisture released into the air, and less moisture means even less rain. Once this cycle locks in, it's brutally hard to reverse. If the current trend continues, studies warn that up to 40% of the forest could cross this tipping point before the century's end. Imagine the Amazon, the very symbol of abundance, slowly transforming into a patchwork of grasslands, dotted with fire-scarred stumps. And then there are the small heroes: bees, butterflies, bats, and beetles, the pollinators that quietly keep the jungle alive. As heat rises and rain falters, their numbers are plunging. Many flowers no longer bloom when they're supposed to, and the insects that depend on them simply move on or die off. The result: fewer seeds, fewer new trees, fewer fruits for animals, a chain reaction that reaches every corner of the forest. Even the amphibians, those tiny frogs and toads that sing the soundtrack of the jungle nights, are disappearing. Sensitive to the slightest change in temperature or humidity, they've become the first casualties of a warming rainforest. Their absence means more mosquitoes, more imbalance, and fewer clues about the health of the ecosystem. Beneath the surface, an even quieter crisis unfolds. Soil microbes, the microscopic engineers that recycle nutrients, are dying off too. Without them, the forest's ability to regenerate after fires or logging slows dramatically. What used to bounce back in a few seasons now takes decades, if it recovers at all. As native species struggle, invasive ones are taking advantage. Heat-tolerant grasses and fast-growing shrubs, often brought in accidentally through agriculture or trade, are spreading aggressively. They choke out young saplings, change the chemistry of the soil, and make the forest even more flammable. It's as if the jungle's immune system is breaking down, letting in everything it once kept in check for the people who live within this vast ecosystem, especially the indigenous and riverine communities. The climate crisis isn't an abstract idea. It's everyday life. Rivers that once teemed with fish now run low or dry up too early. Crops like manioc and corn are failing more often. Traditional harvests of nuts, fruits, and medicinal plants are harder to predict. In some areas, families are being forced to move, not because of war or politics, but because the forest they depend on no longer behaves like a forest. The changing rainfall patterns also mean fewer transportation routes. Many communities travel by river, and more isolation during dry spells. What was once a natural calendar tied to the forest's rhythm is now chaos. The tragedy of climate change in the Amazon isn't just about trees or animals. It's about the unraveling of a system that has worked in perfect harmony for millions of years. When the heat rises, the forest loses moisture. When the forest loses moisture, it loses life. And when it loses life, the earth loses one of its best defenses against the very warming that caused it. The irony couldn't be sharper. The Amazon, once a solution to climate change, is now becoming one of its casualties. Amid this collapse, one tiny creature is seen as the main problem. The leafcutter ants, tiny farmers, giant problems. In the heart of Brazil's jungle, there's a quiet, tireless army at work. One that never sleeps, never complains, and can strip a tree bare overnight. Meet the leafcutter ants. To the untrained eye, they're just specks marching along the forest floor, each carrying a bright green shard like a flag. But look closer, and you'll realize you're watching one of nature's most sophisticated agricultural societies, and one that's causing more chaos than anyone expected. Unlike most insects that eat what they collect, leafcutter ants, mainly of the Atta and Acromyrmex species, don't actually eat the leaves they cut. Instead, they use them to farm fungus. Yes, you heard that right. These ants are farmers, and they've been doing agriculture for millions of years, long before humans even thought about planting seeds. Here's how their operation works. Worker ants slice leaves with surgical precision, carry them underground, and feed them to a special fungus that serves as the colony's main food source. They even tend to this fungus, protecting it from disease, pruning it, and fertilizing it with chewed-up leaf pulp. It's the ultimate symbiotic relationship. The ants feed the fungus, and the fungus feeds the ants. It's a tiny civilization, buzzing under our feet. Now imagine the scale of their world. A single Atta colony can contain millions of ants, all living in a subterranean city with specialized chambers and ventilation shafts. There's an intricate caste system. Soldiers patrol the borders, workers gather leaves, gardeners tend to the fungus, and somewhere deep within, the queen reigns supreme. In 2012, a team of Brazilian scientists did something astonishing. They poured concrete into an abandoned nest to map its structure. When the soil was removed, what they uncovered looked like an alien metropolis, a sprawling underground maze with tunnels stretching for tens of meters, fungus gardens the size of dining tables, and a ventilation system so efficient it rivaled modern engineering. The researchers estimated that the ants had moved over 40 tons of soil to build their home. These tiny creatures had essentially terraformed their own underground city. No wonder scientists call them ecosystem engineers. At first glance, leafcutter ants seem like ecological superheroes. By digging and aerating the soil, they help water and oxygen reach plant roots. Their abandoned tunnels become homes for other species. Their farming activities recycle nutrients and even help seeds germinate, kickstarting forest recovery after disturbance. They're the ultimate recyclers, the unsung gardeners of the rainforest. But, and it's a big but, their story isn't entirely rosy. In a balanced ecosystem, leafcutters play an important role. But when the forest starts to weaken, like Amazon is, say, due to deforestation, rising temperatures, or loss of natural predators, these ants can turn from caretakers into forest wreckers. They can strip young trees bare faster than they can regrow. In commercial plantations, they're considered major pests, capable of stunting growth or even killing entire plots of saplings. Their defoliation reduces tree height, diameter, and resilience. And in younger forests, it can slow recovery to a crawl. Because leafcutter ants are picky eaters, their selective dining habits change which plants can survive. Over time, that alters the entire composition of the forest, making it less diverse and less stable. It's like they're reshaping the jungle according to their own agricultural logic, one fungus garden at a time. So why do they thrive so much now? One factor is nest density. The more nests in an area, the more damage they do. And as the forest gets fragmented, these ants find new open areas to colonize, add in fewer predators like armadillos and anteaters, which are also in decline, and suddenly the ants are multiplying without restraint. Younger trees, with softer leaves, are especially vulnerable. A single night of cutting can leave them leafless, unable to photosynthesize, starved of energy, and open to diseases. In this way, the ants accelerate what climate change has already started. The slow unraveling of the Amazon's ecological fabric. It's ironic, really. The same species that once helped keep the forest healthy is now pushing it further toward collapse. Every leaf they carry underground is one less helping the canopy breathe, one less shield against the blazing heat above. Although leafcutters have their positives, they also have their negative sides. So when the rainforest began dying, a handful of ecologists wondered, could another ant be the unlikely ally? The ants that changed everything? It began as nothing more than a rumor, a strange, almost unbelievable whisper drifting through Brazil's forestry circles. Officially, the government attributed its stunning reforestation success to sustainable agriculture, new conservation grants, and advanced satellite monitoring. But behind closed doors, a different story circulated among scientists, one so bold it bordered on science fiction. They spoke of an experiment involving genetically enhanced super ants. Noma Myrmex essenbecki, the notorious army ants known for hunting leafcutters. When these two species clash, nature itself seems to tremble. Entire colonies wiped out in cataclysmic battles fought for larvae and pupae. So millions of these ants were released to solve Brazil's deforestation problems. According to those in the know, deep in the research labs of Embrapa, Brazil's leading agricultural and environmental research institution, a team of ecologists had been working on a radical solution to one of the Amazon's oldest enemies, the destructive leafcutter ants. So, the scientists decided, if they couldn't beat the ants, maybe they could out-ant them using these enhanced army ants. When word got out that Brazilian researchers were experimenting with breeding or even genetically optimizing army ants, the global scientific community reacted with disbelief. "You're creating a Frankenstein ant," one critic said in an editorial. Another called it mad science in the jungle. And honestly, they had a point. The idea sounded insane. What if these enhanced ants escaped control? What if they outcompeted native species or disrupted ecosystems even more? The thought of a swarm of lab-engineered ants marching across the Amazon wasn't exactly comforting, but the Brazilian researchers insisted they weren't making monsters, they were making healers. Here's the strange logic that drove the project. Leafcutter ants, for all their destructive tendencies, are also master soil engineers. Their underground labyrinths aerate the earth, spread nutrients, and help fungal networks thrive, all crucial for forest regeneration. The goal wasn't to eliminate the ants, but to control their behavior by controlling their population. Using selective breeding, microbiome adjustments, and environmental conditioning, Embrapa scientists worked to produce colonies that would do the controlling. At the same time, they are also creating genetically modified leafcutters that prefer degraded soil areas over healthy forest zones, cut less foliage, and focus more on organic debris. Cultivate fungal strains that boost nitrogen and carbon cycling. Basically, they were turning nature's most notorious gardeners into eco-restorers. This new wave of research built on decades of integrated pest management, Brazil's ongoing program to control leafcutter ants in agriculture and forestry. Traditionally, IPM used chemical baits like sulfluramide or fipronil to suppress ant colonies. Over time, however, these methods raised concerns about toxicity and ecosystem harm, so Embrapa and its partners began shifting toward biological and sustainable control. Researchers explored fungal pathogens, bacteria, and even RNA interference, cutting-edge gene silencing tech that could influence ant metabolism or fungal symbiosis without harming other species. Still, none of these approaches offered what Brazil truly needed: a scalable, self-sustaining, natural solution. That's where the genetically modified leafcutters came in. The project officially launched in 2018 in a closed test zone within Pará, one of the most deforested states in the Amazon basin. The goal: see if selectively bred ants could revive soils that had been stripped bare by cattle ranching and fire. At first, nothing seemed different. The ants built nests, foraged as usual, and cultivated their fungus gardens. But within a year, something remarkable started to happen. Soil samples from the test plots showed a 35% increase in nitrogen levels and a noticeable rise in organic matter. The ants' tunneling activity helped water infiltrate deeper, preventing erosion. Dead leaves and woody debris decomposed faster, feeding the microbial life beneath the surface. Of course, none of this has appeared in official reports. Brazil's environmental ministry credited the gains to traditional reforestation programs, improved seed distribution, community planting projects, and expanded forest protection zones. Those were all true, but insiders quietly admitted that something else was helping push the recovery forward. Farmers near the test sites began noticing that soil which had been barren for years was suddenly supporting spontaneous growth. "The ground feels alive again," one farmer in Pará reportedly told a local radio station. "Even the weeds are growing taller." Local ecologists started referring to the phenomenon as terra viva, living earth. Once mocked as reckless dreamers, the scientists behind the Super Ant project started gaining quiet respect. Foreign researchers from Indonesia, Kenya, and the Democratic Republic of Congo visited to study the experiment's effects on soil regeneration. Even the COP30 discussions in Belém included backdoor conversations about Brazil's mysterious biological catalyst. What made the project truly revolutionary was its self-sufficiency. Unlike chemical methods that require constant funding and maintenance, the enhanced ant colonies sustained themselves naturally. They multiplied, spread, and continued enriching the soil long after the researchers stopped monitoring them. Sure, critics still warned of long-term ecological risks. After all, messing with nature is never without consequences. In a world desperate for solutions, maybe the craziest ideas are the ones that work best. But the ants alone couldn't save the jungle. They were only one piece of a larger, radical plan. Reforesting, bringing back the lost forests. By the time word got out about Brazil's mysterious super ants, the jungle was already whispering a different story, one of green returning to brown, life sprouting from dust, and roots gripping the earth again. It wasn't magic, though it sure looked like it. Brazil's reforestation efforts had been underway for years, but something changed when biology, community wisdom, and technology finally began working in sync. Projects run by Amazon Conservation had already reforested more than 250,000 trees across degraded lands, many of them in the buffer zones around Manu National Park. What set these new projects apart was the way they wove science into local tradition, blending ecological engineering with human resilience. Instead of relying on fast-growing exotic species, Brazil made a deliberate choice to replant using native trees. Slow to rise, yes, but strong enough to bring balance back to entire ecosystems. Each tree wasn't just a carbon sponge. It was a memory of what the forest used to be, a promise of shade, oxygen, and stability. This native-first approach didn't just heal the land, it repaired relationships between people and nature. That's where the ants came in. The so-called super ants, bred and refined from native ant colonies, became an unlikely ally in the process. As the ants dug through the soil, they created vast networks of tunnels that acted like living irrigation systems. Water drained more evenly, air reached deeper layers of the soil, and nutrients began to circulate again. Many communities began reclaiming ancestral agricultural practices, rotational planting, forest gardening, and natural composting, that modern methods had all but erased. These practices didn't just grow food, they gave the land room to breathe, allowing crops and forest trees to coexist. The result was a new kind of self-sustaining landscape, one where conservation didn't mean locking people out of nature, but inviting them back into harmony with it. There was also an economic dimension. As communities replanted, they saw an increase in household income, thanks to better soil productivity and ecotourism opportunities. Small-scale farmers began harvesting fruits, nuts, and medicinal plants from newly revived forest edges. Each tree planted wasn't just a symbol of hope, it was an investment in the future. Scientists started calling it nature's recursion, but locals had a simpler term, the forest remembering itself. And amid this transformation, these leafcutters kept working, tireless, unseen, endlessly patient. Their fungus farms deep underground mirrored the lush canopies above, each dependent on the other. In a poetic twist, the same creatures once blamed for tearing the forest apart were now helping stitch it back together, one leaf at a time. By 2025, Brazil's approach had become a global model for integrated restoration, proof that saving the planet wasn't just about tech or money, but about listening to the quiet intelligence already built into nature. Drones and AI-assisted mapping helped locate degraded zones, while the ants and fungi handled the micro-level engineering that no human could replicate. Behind every big ecological success, there's always one stubborn believer who refused to give up. Minister Marina Silva, the woman behind the idea. If Brazil's reforestation story were a movie, Marina Silva would be the quiet protagonist, the one who endures the storms, takes the punches, and still comes back with a plan that changes everything. While the world was busy debating climate targets in boardrooms and summits, she was out in the mud, fighting to save a forest that once seemed doomed. Maria Os Marina, Marina da Silva Vaz de Lima, but everyone just calls her Marina Silva, was born in 1958 in a small rubber-tapping community deep in the Amazon. Her childhood was a world away from politics or power. The same woman who once carried rubber buckets through the jungle is now carrying Brazil's environmental policy on her shoulders. Her mission? To stop deforestation completely by 2030 and reforest what had been lost. When Marina first served as minister between 2003 and 2008, she stunned the world. Her policies cut Amazon deforestation by nearly 60%, creating vast protected areas and launching the Amazon Fund, a financial engine for conservation. She was hailed as a hero, one of foreign policy's top global thinkers and a flag bearer at the 2012 London Olympics. But her journey was never smooth. She faced fierce political resistance, death threats, and pushback from Brazil's powerful agricultural lobby. By 2008, the pressure was unbearable. She resigned. Most people would have stepped back, maybe written a memoir, maybe taught at a university. But Marina isn't most people. She founded the sustainability network RED, ran for president 3 times, and kept pushing for a greener Brazil, even when the odds were stacked against her. When she returned to the ministry in the 2020s, she didn't come back with old ideas. She came back with a revolution. It started with a controversial whisper. What if we worked with the forest's smallest engineers instead of against them? The genetically engineered leafcutter's ant project, as people later called it, wasn't her invention, but it had her fingerprints all over it. The early years were brutal. Funding was scarce, critics were loud, and global media had a field day calling it mad science in the Amazon. But Marina had learned long ago that public opinion doesn't grow trees. Persistence does. She leaned on her network of NGOs, local communities, and international allies. By the following year, something miraculous happened. The soil, once cracked and lifeless, began to soften. Fungi spread. Seeds germinated. Tree roots found their homes. Vegetation came back 20% faster than in nearby control plots. And below it all, the ants worked. Silent, tireless, invisible revolutionaries. That was the turning point. What began as Marina's fantasy became a national headline. Brazil's forest managers started calling the ants Os Engenheiros Verdes, the green engineers. Suddenly, global institutions wanted in. The same scientists who once mocked the project were now publishing papers about it. Under her leadership, deforestation dropped by 36% in a single year, and wildfire rates in 2025 were the lowest in a decade. She also pushed for something visionary, what she called the socio-bioeconomy. The idea was simple but radical. Make standing forests more valuable than cleared land. Instead of cutting trees for short-term profit, communities could earn a living from sustainable agroforestry, carbon credits, and ecotourism. In other words, let the forest pay its own way. And the world took notice. But through all the international applause, Marina kept her usual calm. When asked by a journalist how she managed to pull it off, she smiled and said, "The forest is patient. You just have to be more patient than the people cutting it down." From local experiment to global inspiration, Brazil's forest comeback. Brazil's experiments with ecosystem engineering didn't just stay in the rainforest, they started echoing across the tropics. Suddenly, what once seemed like a mad, homegrown idea was gaining international attention. From Indonesia to the Congo Basin, policymakers and scientists began asking the same question. If it works in the Amazon, could it work here too? Take Indonesia, for example. The archipelago has its own rainforest challenges, with swathes of degraded land, drained peatlands, and rising carbon emissions from forest loss. Inspired by Brazil's progress, the Indonesian government set similarly ambitious targets in its nationally determined contributions: 12 million hectares of forest restored, plus 2 million hectares of peatlands. They face the same hurdles, balancing economic growth, agricultural expansion, and indigenous land rights. But Brazil's success offered a template. Officials even visited Belém in 2025 to study the methods firsthand, from community-driven tree planting to soil-restoring insect programs. In South America itself, collaboration is deepening. The Amazon Cooperation Treaty Organization, which unites Bolivia, Brazil, Colombia, Ecuador, Guyana, Peru, Suriname, and Venezuela, has been exploring joint strategies for forest protection and climate resilience. Brazil's work with superants, reforestation, and integrated forest finance is now being discussed as a model for the entire basin. Financial support followed recognition. On November 6, 2025, Brazil unveiled the Tropical Forests Forever facility, an international fund designed to reward tropical nations for keeping forests standing. The announcement, made in the riverside city of Belém ahead of COP30, was bold. Beyond finance, Brazil's approach has inspired biological experimentation. In regions like Papua New Guinea and parts of the Congo, scientists are exploring whether local insect species can play roles similar to Brazil's super ants, aerating soil, boosting microbial communities, and accelerating native plant regrowth. The idea is simple, but revolutionary. Rather than bulldozing degraded land or relying solely on tree nurseries, you leverage ecosystem engineers that have evolved over millions of years to restore balance naturally. The global shift is subtle but profound. For decades, reforestation was about planting trees as quickly and cheaply as possible. Now it's about restoring function. Soil health, nutrient cycling, pollinators, and microfauna all matter. Brazil's success shows that when you work with nature rather than against it, the results are faster, more resilient, and surprisingly cost-effective. There's a philosophical twist, too. Humanity's most powerful tool for climate restoration turned out to be a creature smaller than a paperclip, ancient and largely ignored. The leafcutter ant, once vilified as a pest, now celebrated as a partner. It embodies nature's own self-correcting intelligence. These ants remind us that solutions don't always come from machines or chemicals. Sometimes they come from the very systems we thought we were too advanced to rely on. Indigenous leaders, who have long understood the rhythms of the forest, see this as confirmation of what they've always known. Ecosystems thrive when left in balance. By the end of COP30, the message was clear. Brazil's mad science had become a movement. From Indonesia to the Amazon neighbors and African rainforest nations, the world was taking notes. Reforestation, once a local struggle, was becoming a global experiment in ecological intelligence. Drone footage of once barren lands, now thick with green canopy, the hum of ants beneath the soil, became an emblem of hope, proof that nature, guided with care and insight, could rewrite the story of destruction. From mockery to a movement, Brazil's super ants may have just rewritten the rulebook for how we heal the planet. The question now is, can the forest truly return? What's your take on this? Share your perspective in the comments section.